Back here with the DP show, I want to clarify something that I was talking about yesterday. When I was making that whole equation to the political season, the political campaign, the politicians, and so forth, the thing I was really criticizing more than anything were voters. In particular, because Mitt Romney had most recently been suffering, especially in the polls, because of that gaffe that he had that was revealed in that video. The thing that I was criticizing was, why would voters have their minds made up by something like this, where he doesn't actually go out there and say anything of any substance? Sure, maybe he got caught being a little too honest or something like that, but I don't understand why that would lead to be more for or more against any one candidate just based on that speech alone. The criticism I was making was, it is just indicative of this whole reality TV show state of mind that everybody's put themselves in, where the only thing that people want is exactly somebody who is going to be saying what they want, somebody who is going to be giving them what they want in an entertainment sort of way, that nobody is really willing to embrace any sort of politician who is going to tell them something that they do not want to hear. And because Romney got caught saying something that this reality TV show electorate did not want to hear, what we're seeing now is that he is suffering really across the board in all these polls, almost to the degree where it's hard to imagine exactly what has to happen for him to pull himself back into it. Some more recent polling data. Don't worry at all. The general election stuff means absolutely nothing. Remember, it is the Electoral College that is going to elect presidents. You have to get to 270 votes in the Electoral College to win the presidency. And right now it is looking as if Ohio has gone into the Obama camp. The most recent polling data out of Ohio has the president up by, in one case, 10. In another case, I believe it is 7. And in fact, both candidates were there today. Here's one from CBS and the New York Times, has Obama up 10. If the Republicans don't win Ohio and sweep the South, it's all but impossible for them to take the presidency, as we saw with John McCain in 2008, and as what looks like it's shaping up right now, because Obama was enjoying a pretty big boost after his convention, and it looked like that was starting to wane a little bit. But now, and again, shame on everybody who's using this as the launching pad for how they're going to decide their vote, but it looks like this is what's going to be the case. And right now, Obama is stretching out some mighty big leads, almost to the point where you can make the argument that he's just got to win one other state. And speaking of which, the polling data out of Iowa has Obama well ahead of Romney there, outside of the margin for error. You can go down to Florida, where he's extending his lead. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a state that is that large, so close as Obama getting to 270. But the other great criticism that I'm making, and this is for both candidates, Obama, Romney or Obama, is they continue talking along such lines as what the Dayton Daily News has Romney attacking Obama. He says, well, I'll just start reading it. In Ohio, with his 2 campaign jets parked behind him and his running mate standing by, Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney told about 3,000 people here Tuesday that President Barack Obama is soft on China and has no economic plan except to raise taxes on small business. We cannot afford 4 more years of Barack Obama, Romney said during an outdoor rally in the chilly wind on the grounds of Dayton International Airport. If this president persists on the road of making it harder and harder for small businesses to grow and thrive, he's going to slowly but surely weaken our economy and turn us into Greece. Now, what is Greece? I'm sure he's referencing how the Greeks are suffering around 30% unemployment, and that's officially announced. According to John Williams at Shadow Stats, especially the young people in Greece are very unemployed. More than 50% of young people are unemployed in Greece. Of course, according to John Williams at Shadow Stats, the United States of America has somewhere around 23% unemployment already. So technically, we already are Greece. But here's the problem with Mitt Romney's argument here, and this was articulated by, of all people, Bill Clinton on The Daily Show, of all places, that what Mitt Romney is advocating, first of all, his argument was done throughout the first decade in the 2000s, where we were going to minimize taxes, especially at the top, and insist that that was going to trickle down, much like Reagan argued. But his question was, where are the jobs? The problem with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama's argument is that they're doing the exact same thing that was done in that first part of the decade. Barack Obama has extended the Bush tax cuts. In fact, my argument is Barack Obama has been better at being George W. Bush than was George W. Bush, in part because he's able to squeeze a little bit more popularity out of it. But he extended the Bush tax cuts, not talking about any kind of foreign policy or anything like that. Almost every fiscal policy that has been pursued by Barack Obama was initiated by George W. Bush. Mitt Romney is now arguing that the pathway to prosperity begins in 2008. If we take the budget back to 2008 levels, if we adopt the same sort of spending programs that George W. Bush was pursuing, that would get us back on the road to fiscal prosperity. But again, using Bill Clinton's argument, where are the jobs? And this is a question that I would ask both presidential candidates. Where are the jobs here? And it's not necessarily fair that anybody be forced to answer for all these different problems that not are just the doing of George W. Bush, but Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson is really where you can go all the way back to where you can see the state spending running amok issue getting us into this problem that we're running into right now. Well, what kind of problem are we running into right now? Gary North, somebody writing for something called the Tea Party Economist. He's what is, I guess would be best considered a conservative economist that also tries to put a Christian flair in his different economic writings, has an article that was picked up by LouRockwell.com today. And in it, he indicates that these are the financial straits that the country has run into. I'll begin reading. He is criticizing an argument that is put forth by 5 mainstream economists that make the claim that the on-budget deficit is $1.2 trillion a year, or as the deficit is being reported by the national government, it is indicating that we are going to be spending $1.2 trillion more every year than we take in, which on the surface is just where the beginning of the argument should begin, because as he indicates, quote, the on-budget deficit is peripheral to the real federal deficit, which reflects the unfunded liabilities of the federal government, primarily in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. When you factor in all those things, it is going to increase the deficit by $11 trillion a year. Right now, it's reported that the deficit is $16 trillion a year. According to Gary North, it is going to raise $11 trillion a year when you factor in all of the unfunded liabilities. Now, this is something else I referenced yesterday, that you got some figures that say that the unfunded liabilities come in at about $90 trillion. Well, Gary North now is indicating that the deficit, quote, has a present value of $222 trillion. There it is in black and white. $222 trillion. This is from an article, again, that he wrote for the Tea Party Economist. 5 mainstream economists sound a warning. When you factor in the unfunded liabilities, $222 trillion. Now, I've been making the argument all summer long now that both these candidates are going to leave one and all generally unrepresented, in part because you have a supposed anti-war candidate, anti-war president who's been expanding wars in places that George W. Bush had never dreamt of going, who is also indicating that he has been trying to pursue rational fiscal policy while also pursuing social aims that is only leading to one thing: massive federal deficit. And on the other end, we have a conservative, wink wink, candidate who is arguing that in order to try to conserve but while saving the economy, we have to expand the deficit by $5 trillion in the first few years of his presidency, being Mitt Romney. If you have any concern about the deficit, the state of the dollar, or anything along those lines, there is no way you can find any kind of representation with either of these two candidates. Again, Mitt Romney's idea about fiscal responsibility is going back to 2008 spending levels, which is running at a massive deficit. And this is before we start talking about the 100,000 extra troops that he wants to put into uniform, and all the different defense measures that he wants to pursue. Even before we start doing any of that stuff, $222 trillion, according to Gary North. This means that the federal government today must invest $222 trillion in market investments that will return about 5% per year for the next 75 years. How easy is that, you may ask? Well, according to Gary North, no such investments exist. And the federal government does not have $222 trillion in reserve. It doesn't have $222 trillion handy. The Federal Reserve System could print that, says Gary North, but then that would only lead to hyperinflation. So this is the real conversation that should be having by both presidential candidates, and that we are being introduced to by exactly nobody. And next week they're going to start their debates, and they're going to talk about things like who's tougher on Iran, who's got Israel's back even more, what about this immigration thing, President Obama, something about a birth certificate maybe, Mitt Romney, how many jobs did you send overseas with Bain Capital? Who cares? Because none of that stuff is nearly as important as what are we going to do when this behemoth that has inserted itself in the center of everything, that being the central government, and all of the incredible funding that it demands, what are we going to do when it's finally understood that this thing is going to demand so much more just to sustain life than we are able to provide for it? Nobody is willing to have that conversation. And by that, again, I'm not just talking about these presidential candidates. I'm talking again about the reality TV-fed electorate who are unable to have this conversation, whether it be with themselves or with these articulate, good-looking politicians. This is the problem that the United States of America is facing. This is the issue that needs to be corrected. It isn't just that we have these crooks. Everybody's always quick to go blame the crooks that are taking us down these roads. The problem is you are not taking these crooks and insisting upon them anything that makes perfect sense. And I told you I was going to introduce you to a historian, Tom DiLorenzo, wrote a book called The Real Lincoln. Who's Abe Lincoln? Well, he's Honest Abe Lincoln. He freed the slaves. And one of the things that this book is going to address, if you want to look into it, is whether or not the Civil War was indeed waged to try and free one slave. According to Abe Lincoln, of course, that answer is no. If he could have saved the Union without freeing a slave, he said repeatedly, he would have done that. The reason that he was going to do that, fight the Civil War, was in fact to save the Union. But then the question becomes exactly what was he doing, expending 720,000 lives to save this Union? What was he actually in pursuit of? And DiLorenzo makes this interesting case that you can just go back about 30 years before the Civil War had begun, 40 years maybe, and see that Abe Lincoln's politics revolved around, quote, rechartering the Bank of the United States, enacting a radically higher tariff rate, and ladling out internal improvement subsidies to politically well-connected corporations. Or in other words, he wants to have a Federal Reserve or a Bank of the United States with which he can use to forever be spending money on little pet projects like dams, like highways, like bridges to nowhere, national forests. Think about every other thing that the 20th century is known for as far as public spending goes. Meanwhile, making certain that nobody is able to bring any goods in that are going to be a little bit cheaper than anything that the cronies are manufacturing in the United States of America. And what this is, the way this is going to end, and the argument's going to be made that in fact one of the reasons that the southern states were so fed up that they were going to secede was because they knew that Lincoln's cronies were going to get these sweetheart deals, that they were going to be able to charge the South for anything and anything that they wanted at any cost that they wanted, because it was going to be so difficult to import anything, especially from Great Britain. Or this is how far back this problem goes. This isn't a Mitt Romney thing. This isn't a Barack Obama thing. This is a we have been lied to thing. And this concept about enriching the politically favored on our behalf with the debased currency goes all the way back, really, to the founding of the country. And that now the other issue that we're running into is we are so full of an illiterate electorate that is incapable of not just comprehending this argument, but even listening to it, because it is so against anything that they are interested in listening to. The only thing they want to listen to is something that is going to be spoken lovely and sweetly and is pinpointed at the heart of everything that they want to hear, which is primarily, you're wonderful, you're A-OK, and I'm here to help to make sure that you remain wonderful and A-OK. Until we can listen to something besides that argument, we're going to be continued to be misled by people like Lincoln and their banks and their crony capitals and Mitt Romney and Barack Obama and the long list of things that they have not even begun to address, while forever ignoring the things that desperately need to be addressed. In particular, what are you going to do to try to minimize the impact that the national government is going to have on the economy, rather than trying to use the national government to fix the economy, when history indicates that the only thing that the government does to the economy is further ruin it? When are you going to minimize that problem and try to put this capital, this funding, this whatever you want to call it, back into the hands of private investors, kind of like what Romney is suggesting, so they can do what they do best and make money? The problem is Mitt Romney doesn't want to go all the way and put all of that capital back into the hands of the people who know how to make money. He's got too many cronies. If you want to stop supporting Mitt Romney for that, I support you in that. Don't do it, though, because he got caught saying something stupid. Make sure that you are going to make one of these guys tell you something that's going to be hard to listen to. Until then, I got no sympathy for you. The DP Show on iTalk 106.7. The BP Show is next.